In tonight's squeeze play, has America gone from being a winner to being a loser? How would you rate the United States as a credit risk? Well, Moody's actually has awarded the U.S. with a AAA rating since 1917. But today came word that Moody's is thinking of lowering that rate for the first time ever. Could U.S. Treasury bonds soon rate as junk bonds? Here with us to discuss this is Steve Forbes of Forbes on Fox, among other things. Peter Schiff, author of Crash Proof. And no, that's George Gilder, author of about 150 books and chairman of Gilder Kremers Fund. And we're going to start with Steve Forbes because this article really sort of jumped out at me. It was on the cover of Financial Times, where we heard that Moody's, which hasn't been rating all that well, they rated a lot of subprime debt pretty poorly, but they are thinking of...
It could be a sign of the bottom.
It could be a sign of the bottom, right? But is it conceivable that what they say about the United States is correct, that we may deserve a lower rating as a country?
Well, we certainly deserve a junk bond rating in the way the government has treated the dollar. No great country should have a junk currency, and the policy of the Treasury Department, wink and nod, has been to lower the value of the dollar on the mistaken theory that strengthens the economy by boosting exports. But you see, on the housing side and elsewhere, it creates huge distortions within the economy. No president since Jimmy Carter has trashed the dollar as much as this administration. And what they should do is shore up the dollar, forget about pegging interest rates, soak up some of the excess liquidity, defend the dollar, and by golly, you'll see the equity markets rally.
Of course, we just heard our guest before talking about how what we need are more rate cuts right now.
Forget the Fed trying to manipulate interest rates. What the Fed should do is preserve the integrity of the dollar. Same with the Treasury Department. If it does that, the markets will rally and short-term interest rates will come down on their own because the dollar won't be going down in value.
Now, interestingly, the Financial Times and Moody's didn't talk at all about the dollar. What they were concerned about was the amount of money that we're spending in our federal budget, the U.S. government budget.
By that standard, it's preposterous. The 1970s were much worse than what we have today.
As a percentage of GDP.
Then the budget deficit is far lower than it has been in the past.
But Steve, let me just throw some numbers out because they're kind of shocking when you think of how much we're spending. In 2007, we spent a total of $2.7 trillion. $2.7 trillion on our federal budget.
Consistent about 20-21% of the GDP for a long time. That's what doesn't worry me. What worries me is what they're doing to the tax code. That's what worries me.
Keep that graphic up if we can. The 56% part of that pie is Medicaid, Medicare, and Social Security. And those are the issues that concern Moody's most, shouldn't they?
Well, yes, and the way you do that is not by their solution, another solution of raising the retirement age to 120 and throwing people in the gutter on Medicaid and Medicare and raising taxes. The way to do it is to allow young people to have their own personal retirement accounts. That's the way you save Social Security. And on Medicare, Medicaid, and health care in general, let the consumer have more control over health care dollars through things like health savings accounts and allowing you to buy health insurance around the country instead of in one particular state.
But you're not concerned about the size of the federal government right now.
The size is what it is, and sadly no one's made an effort to reduce it. But what I want is a fundamental reform of Social Security and health care. I don't want the root canal austerity approach that the Democrats have and certain Republicans
have.
have.
George Gilder, I see you shaking your head no when you say concerned about the size of the federal government.
I'm not vaguely concerned about the size of the federal government. It's what it is, and what I understand is that what we do today is almost totally irrelevant to supporting old people with medical care and food and housing in 2025 or 2050. The world's going to be completely different 20 years from now. The idea of us in the middle of a war and a crisis worrying about Social Security is just perverse.
Has America become a second-rate power?
No, we have 5% of world population, about a quarter of world GDP, and about close to half of world market cap. The idea that we're somehow a victim of the global economy is obscene.
Well, I think Peter Schiff is saying exactly that, aren't you, Peter?
Well, first of all, when it comes to, sovereign debt, it's not the default risk that they look at so much. It's the foreign exchange risk. It's the risk that you loan money money and you get paid back in depreciated currency. And certainly the dollar has no place to go but down. Ben Bernanke's made it clear he couldn't give a darn about the value of the dollar. He should be raising rates, not cutting them. But if you look at the problem we have with subprime, right, the biggest subprime borrower of them all is the federal government. And we've done the same thing as individuals. We have an adjustable rate mortgage on our national debt. The national debt now, which is approaching $10 trillion, is financed with treasury bills. We used to have it financed with 30-year government bonds. But in order to save money in the short run, just like homeowners did, we refinanced that into T-bills. The problem is going to really come when short-term interest rates spike up. What happens if short-term rates go to 10 or 20% like they did in 1980, and all of a sudden we have to pay $2 trillion a year in interest on the debt, and it's held mainly by foreigners?
Well, what does happen then?
Well, we default. Either we print money and pay it off like Weimar Republic Germany.
Ask Steve, has it come down to the point where we might actually default, and in that case, Moody's recommendation might be accurate?
No, there'll never be a formal default. You'll just get back depreciated dollars.
What's the difference?
Well, the difference is you can preserve the integrity of the dollar through open market operations, sell bonds and reduce the money supply. It's very simple.
They can't do that, Steve.
Why not?
If we have a $2 trillion external drain, if we have to print up $2 trillion,
you're assuming we get 20% interest rates.
Well,
you only get 20% interest rates if you're printing globs of money. If you preserve the integrity of your currency, as Volcker showed, guess what? Interest rates come down.
We've got inflation right now already as high as anything we had in the 1970s. It's going to get a lot worse. The price of gold has tripled in the last 6 or 7 years. It's going up every day. The dollar's about to fall through the floor.
But you're making it sound like this is like the weather. We can control the value of the dollar.
How are we going to do that? How are we going to control it? Are we going to raise interest rates several hundred basis points?
Didn't Paul Volcker control it by cutting off the amount of cash that was circulating?
Remember,
history shows when you preserve the integrity of your currency, interest rates come down.
Steve,
and the way you do it is you take a bond, sell it, reduce the excess liquidity, and voila, people want to hold your currency again.
Steve, who's going to buy it? We can't do that anymore. We have a negative savings rate. We have a huge current account deficit.
Negative savings rate is nonsense. We have half the world's savings.
No, we don't. How can we have a $65 billion a month trade deficit? We don't have any savings. That's the problem.
Trade numbers mean nothing, Peter.
Sure
We've
they
had
do.
400 years, America's had trade deficits of 350.
Hey, guys, you're going to cut off this conversation for just a second, because one thing I want to focus on with George Gilder is the notion that the United States still continues to be the cradle of entrepreneurial activity. That is, this is the country that has a right combination of political and economic freedom to create entrepreneurs like no other country in the world, no matter what Moody's says, right?
Yeah, I just came from an advanced equities conference in California where